Hello everyone. Thank you for checking out today's video. I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Let's get started. What's the most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? I always had a connection with my grandma. When I was a little kid there were a couple of times when I'd run to my mom all excited that my grandma was visiting. My mom knew grandma wasn't visiting because she always called first, but then she'd roll into the driveway a few minutes later. Once as an adult I got a strong feeling I should go see her. It was late, but she usually stayed up late. When I got there I told her I had a feeling I should visit, and she admitted that she'd had some trouble with a tenant at one of her rentals who threatened her, and she'd had a bad feeling that night too. When she passed she'd been in hospice for a couple of weeks, but there was no sign that the end was near. It was the middle of the night, and I had a dream where I was in her room and she suddenly sat up and smiled. She told me that it was okay and she wasn't in pain anymore and was going to a better place, then walked out the door. A few minutes later my wife woke me up and told me we just got the call that she'd just passed. I'm pretty skeptical, and I know there are rational and mundane explanations for all these things. No need to point them out to me. There's a part of me that still hopes there's something more and takes comfort from these experiences. I hate that you have to ask people not to cynically crap all over your experience. You can be logical and still leave room for the inexplicable. People like to pretend we have everything figured out, and that gives them comfort, even though we barely understand so many concepts that drive our very existence, like brain chemistry and forces of the universe. Thanks for sharing. It's a beautiful experience. From pretty much the first night after my dad died, I started seeing him in my dreams. I didn't think anything of it at first, because I figured that's a perfectly reasonable subconscious response to losing a loved one. The weird thing though was that he looked seriously real. Everything else in my dream would have that strange cartoonish vibe to it, yet I could look at my dad and count the individual hairs in his mustache and on his head. In one of the dreams, I became lucid and realized I was asleep. I asked my dad point blank, "Are you visiting me, or is this just a figment of my imagination? I need to know." He smiled, hugged me and said, "I'm here with you right now, son, and I always will be. I love you." I woke up suddenly, and as I did, I saw a very light shadow. Had it not moved, I wouldn't have seen it. It was a head and shoulders, leaning through the doorway and into my room. As soon as I saw it, it quickly moved away and backed out of my room. Somehow it was calming rather than scary. I was absolutely amazed, because that's exactly what my dad used to do when I was little, and he left really early for work. He'd pop his head in and say goodbye. The way this shadow moved was exactly the same. I'm convinced it was him checking in on me. If that wasn't strange enough, my mum called me downstairs that same morning. She tells me to go into the living room and look at the floor. I go in and guess what? Dad's reading glasses have somehow ended up slap bang in the middle of the room. That 110% confirmed it for me. Thank you for posting this. My own father is very ill, and I truly hope he will someday check in on me as well. Sending good wishes to you and your family, and glad you had a loving father who loves you still. One time in the dead of night my phone was on the edge of my nightstand. I was woken up by it buzzing, and when I went to grab it, it fell off the stand. I reached down with only my head and torso off bed to grab it. All I heard was the word night in my right ear. Bro, that's why I got the IKEA bed with the floor clothing drawers underneath. Wait until you reach into your pants drawer one day, only to have a hand grab yours. Worst part is you can't change your trousers after you've shat them. Crazy demon tree story. Let me preface this by saying I'm one of the most skeptical people you'll ever meet. I'm not religious. I don't believe in ghosts or aliens or any of that. This is the weirdest thing I've ever encountered, and I have no real logical explanation for it. No drugs or booze were involved. My friends and I went camping up in the White Mountains of NH most summers in middle and high school and a few years after till life happened, and we all went our ways. Now being a bunch of unorganized teen boys / man children, we always took forever to get in gear and actually get going, usually not leaving southern MA where we lived until late afternoon, early evening. One year we got up there about 10 PM or so and decided rather than hike into the woods we'd just sort of camp/crash out in the parking lot and hike in the AM. After a bit of unwinding and some food, everyone went to bed except for me and one other dude. We ended up wandering over to a small wooden footbridge over a river. Was a perfectly clear night filled with stars and a fairly bright moon, and we were shooting the breeze for a good couple hours about all sorts of stuff, movies, games, life, etc, etc. Had to be well after midnight by this point. As we were chatting we both got this creepy feeling of something being there, and it was sinister. Looking at the far end of the bridge there was this massive dead tree, no leaves, just clawing branches, silhouetted against the sky. We both were like, man, I swear that tree is creeping me out, but that's silly, right? At first we tried to dismiss it as silly, but both of us kept feeling more and more unnerved until I finally was like, screw this, I'm a grown man, I'm not afraid of a damn tree, I'ma walk over there. I get like 2/3 of the way across the bridge, and it feels like something reached in and grabbed my pounding heart. Just went totally ice cold. I backed up and was like, yeah, I'm afraid of a tree. I seriously think I'm not coming back if I go over there. We retreated from the bridge and decided to go to bed back in the sleeping bags by the car. Next morning, after breakfast, we decide to hike into the trail by going across that bridge. Halfway across, my friend freezes up. Dude, I look across the bridge. It's a clearing. There's no trees there. I don't experience anything like this ever, nor believe in it, but there was this one time. There a cabinet near the top of my staircase, and I had placed my water bottle on it, not on the edge, but in the middle where in no way would it be able to fall off on its own or due to any breeze. I'm sitting on the couch which is a couple feet away from the cabinet and the water bottle simply flies off the cabinet like someone sucker punched it and goes flying down the staircase. I was home alone. It was 1 AM and I have no clue why it happened. Don't want to think about it, I just keep living my life. Haha, I know this wasn't meant to be funny, but the last sentence is hilarious, and I feel like how I'd react as well. Just note, not gonna acknowledge, gotta keep on going. In a lot of mythologies, that was the actual advice they would give people was, if you don't acknowledge it, it just ignores you too. This happened to my roommate, but I believe him, because he's not one to lie, and the stories are endless. I've been there for some, but this one takes the cake. He grew up in Colombia and moved around a lot as a kid. He lived on a farm for about a year, and it had 2 dirt roads connecting to it, the main road and a sort of shortcut that passed through other farms too. Anyway, he was a gamin, which basically just means a dirty street kid, and only went home to sleep and eat, meaning he would come home super late. On one of those occasions, it's so late he decides to take the shortcut. About halfway through he encounters this massive dog blocking the path. It wasn't threatening looking, but every time he tried to move closer the dog would just growl as if to say, not another step, pal. My roommate just assumed the dog had babies nearby or something, but the dog was so massive he didn't want to risk it, so he just turned back and went the long way. The next day, an entire family was found butchered on one of the farms along the shortcut. It happened that night, and it was most likely gorillas, since they were just massacred, which means anyone found along the path would have met the same fate, including my roommate. Guardian dog. So about 6 months after I bought out house, I started noticing something odd. Every once in a while I would catch sight of something out of the corner of my eye and always assume it was my cat, since it was the same size, shape, and moved like a cat. However, I would realize a few seconds later that my cat was in the yard or another room. I would try to look back, but nothing was ever there. It was so quick I always dismissed it. Once, at night, I saw it on the ceiling, and I about had a heart attack. I also would hear things in the house. I thought my husband was doing the dishes due to the clinking in the sink, but then I would realize he was in the bedroom and the kitchen was empty. It took about a year for my husband and I to start wondering aloud if we were actually seeing things or if something was up. Turns out he was seeing stuff too, just little flashes here and there. My husband said he heard some stuff too on his days off when no one was home. The biggest moment was when I woke up in the middle of the night and saw my cat curled up on my side table. I heard him purring. His fur looked darker and his purr was lower, but I was half asleep and didn't notice. I went to the bathroom, and on my way I passed my cat sleeping in the hallway. It actually took me a few seconds, but I literally felt my chest turn cold. I went back into my bedroom and saw that the bedside table was empty. We are pretty sure we got a cat ghost in our house. The only thing I know about the previous owner was that he was put into a mental hospital. I have had to route a bunch of paperwork back to him over the years because his affairs were very clearly not taken care of when he was hospitalized. My theory is that he had a cat that got lost in the shuffle and it's waiting for him to come back. My dad is originally from the Caribbean and later immigrated to America, but over the years has periodically visited his native country. Years ago, my dad was on one of his visits, staying with two of my uncles in an area which has since been developed for tourism, but at the time was the outskirts of town, where things started to get rural. Him, my uncles, and a few friends were partying one night with some friends where they were staying. One of my uncles, who is notoriously hungry all the time, suggested going to get food. The only places open that late were street vendors in town who sold fried food, and my dad and my uncle got in the car and drove into town. Driving from where they were staying to the main part of town, they had to drive long stretch through areas which were essentially empty except for sugar cane fields lining the roads. They bought food, and by the time they headed back it was about 1 to 2 am. Walking on the road, alongside the sugar cane fields, was a woman with long hair wearing a white nightgown. Along her side was a large pack of dogs, all of whom were silent. They passed the woman and immediately thought it was strange that she was wandering alone through this empty stretch of fields late at night. My uncle, grumbling that he didn't want dogs in his car, turns around. They cut a U-turn only to find that there is nothing in the road behind them. No woman, no dogs. Just the road surrounded by sugar cane. They came back to where they were staying and told their friends about what they saw, to which my second uncle replied, "You too?" My other uncle explained that a lot of people had seen the woman walking in the road, and several of the friends confirmed they'd seen her as well. They identified the woman as La Viuda, last name, which in Spanish means the widow, last name. She was a wealthy aunt of a guy they grew up with who, after her husband died, had become reclusive. Some of them having known the family since they were children, they had recognized her. The kicker, the widow had died about 5 years prior to this incident. What always strikes me about this story is that it isn't a story about some random urban myth or unidentifiable figure people were claiming to see. Many of these guys had known this woman's family and met/seen her as she was alive when they were growing up in a small town. She died, and for whatever reason, they kept seeing her in person years later. My dad is still Facebook friends with the woman's nephew and has shown me pictures of the guy.